Start out. Calling the meeting of the Finance Committee to order. So this is tonight we have a pretty full agenda. We've got obviously first we've got a couple of council meeting minutes to approve from previous meetings. Then we're going to discuss the bonding for the Roosevelt Field, and then we have the first few departments to begin discussing the city budget. We're going to start talking about Roosevelt Field right after we discuss minutes. Do I have, Lisa, did you copies of the minutes? Just one moment, folks. Nice. This was an eyebrow. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Pursuant to the open meeting laws, let everybody in attendance know that this meeting is being video and audio recorded. Thank you. Thank you. Do have a minute to say. So, do I have a motion or any debate on the meeting minutes of April 3rd? Do I have a motion to? Motion to approve. Seconded by Councilor Murphy. All those in favor? Aye. Meeting minutes from May 14th. Any debate or a motion to approve? Motion made by Councilor Winslow to approve. Seconded by Councilor Murphy. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Okay. So we're gonna put the annual appropriation afterwards. We're gonna discuss 24219, the $1,450,000 is appropriated to pay costs of design and construction of Roosevelt Park, and to meet this appropriation, the treasurer, with approval of the mayor, is authorized. Sorry, I want to make sure. Is this the updated language?
There is a change to the vote, nothing substantive. It's just having run about right by bond council, they had suggested we make some site changes and little verbiage changes. On top is the red line version, which will show where the changes are, and on the bottom is the second sheet, where is the official warrant.
Yeah, just let the record show. These are just correct. It looks like these are just corrections to specific which MGL chapter or section this is referring to, and just some wording in terms of just grammatical changes here. So, order that $1,450,000 is appropriated to pay costs of design and construction of Roosevelt Park. And to meet this appropriation, the treasurer, with approval of the mayor, is authorized to borrow said amount under Massachusetts General Law. Massachusetts General Law, Section 71, Chapter 44B, or pursuant to any other enabling authority, and to issue bonds or notes of the city. Therefore, the mayor and treasurer are each authorized to contract for and expend any federal, state, or other aid available for the project, including the acceptance of any grants related to such project, and to take any other act to be necessary to carry out this project. Any premium received upon the sale of any bonds or notes approved by this vote, unless any such premium applied to the payment of the costs of issuance of such bonds or notes, may be applied to the payment of costs approved by this vote in accordance with Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 44, Section 20, thereby reducing the amount authorized to be borrowed to pay such costs by a like amount. Repayment of said loan will be made by utilizing available Community Preservation Act funds pursuant to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 44B, as previously authorized and approved by the Malden Community Preservation Committee. So there's that. talk about the structure, what we would be called to do, what the motions I would expect to hear. Then we would be splitting this into two things: accept the CPC recommendation, and then the motion after that would be to actually accept the bond. And one more note: we have received a number of emails for and against. Again, this isn't a public hearing, but we want to make copies of these. We have hard copies. One hard copy of the information. I think a lot of several councils have received this. This will be part of the public record. In summary, we have received emails from 12 individuals in favor of and 5 individuals opposed to the funding of this project. So with that, I will open it up for...
Well, we do have, with us, that we have worked from the MRA, Steve O'Neill, who is from HSI, our civil engineer, who's been working on this project, like me for a decade. And Pat McGuire, who is a sports field consultant and Steve has also presented to us a number of times, and he does have some information that he can run through for us. And then Patrick also has some more information on turf. So if you'd like to hand it over to Debbie, I don't know if you want to say anything, just let me hand it over to Steve.
This will allow everybody to get background and
Just make sure.
context. Great, thank you.
Okay, again, my name is Steve O'Neill. I'm an associate principal engineer with Ainer Swanson. Just a quick show of hands, how many people have heard me speak to the project and the scope of the project? Just in the interest of brevity, I don't want to bore people with prolonged technical information on the project. So it looks like the large majority of the folks in the room have heard at least some of the comments. So just by way of very quick background, we were brought on board, as Councilor Murphy said, back in 2009 to work with the city. And the charge really was to, given the poor condition of the athletic fields at Roosevelt Park, which are namely 2 softball diamonds and a rectangular multi-use surface for any sport that requires a rectangular playing field. Because of the poor conditions of those fields, we were brought in with the charge of basically working with the city to help them come up with an appropriate scope of work in order to rehabilitate those athletic facilities at Roosevelt Park. So after looking at the conditions, there were some preliminary investigations done in terms of the grading of the site, the soil conditions of the site, the drainage of the site, the conditions of the turf grass. We talked with Parks and Recreation, Public Works about the use of the field, what the anticipated future use of the field would be. And after considering all of those factors, we came to recommend to the city that we felt that the most effective way of rehabilitating the field would be to use an infill synthetic turf system and with the use of a crumb rubber sand infill. So that in the scope of the project that's currently contemplated would basically replicate the facilities that are at Roosevelt Park currently, which are 2 softball diamonds together with a rectangular overlay over those softball fields. The rectangular field could be used in sports like soccer, lacrosse, football, potentially field hockey, any sport that would require a rectangular field. The scope of the project also includes improvements as what we're referring to as an outdoor classroom and community garden area that's adjacent to the field. On the end of the field closest to the field house at St. Louis School, right between the field and the railroad right-of-way. So we're proposing to improve that outdoor classroom and community garden area. One of the big things there is the opportunity to make that accessible in terms of compliance with current accessibility standards. If you're familiar with that area, it's got pretty steep slopes. So we see opportunity there to improve it so that it can be used by all people. The other element of the project is to enhance the wetland. The wetland is between the field and the railroad right-of-way. It's basically an open basin. It's an integral component of the site's drainage system. Right now, it's really a low-functioning wetland. It's pretty much strewn with litter. It's overgrown with some invasive plant species. It's got dead plant material. So as part of the scope of this project, that wetland will remain an essential component of the site's drainage system. And so we'll look to make improvement to that wetland as well. So that's really an overview of the scope of the project as proposed. What I'd like to do now is to just introduce Pat McGuire from Activitas. Pat is the founder and managing principal of Activitas. They're really a boutique firm that has national recognition as a sports field consultant. Pat has been involved in a number of the synthetic turf fields that exist currently in the city. He's been involved in Maplewood Park, South Broadway Park, the two fields at Pine Banks Park. He's been involved with McDonald Stadium, and he's also been involved in Malden Catholic Stadium. So with that, Pat, if I could turn it over to you for some remarks.
Sure. I'm going to print out a place to help us sort of walk through some of the issues that we heard. First, I want to So this is from a presentation that I had actually hoped to give on the 13th when we met with everybody in the traffic on 95 preventive session. Getting there on that and setting up. So this is generally that. So the first page of this that you see is an overview of the recommended system that we're proposing for Roosevelt Park. It is a dual fiber system. You can see there's two kinds of fibers, monofilament fibers and slit film fibers. This is a very common system, one that's used increasingly in public situations and situations where we're trying to find durability. So these are very durable, long-lasting systems that still perform well for a vast variety of sports. The sanded rubber granular infill that's proposed, this replayability, again, it's a very common system, probably the most used infill system throughout the world. And then lastly, there is a resilient underlayment that is part of this system, essentially a pad, and we are providing that for additional safety for the kids and the athletes who use it. Make sense? So we have heard, not only in Malden, but other places, obviously, the last year or so, an uptick in people who have shared some concerns about synthetic turf systems and their overall health and safety. And it really, I think, comes from the reignition of earlier concerns people had about crumb rubber when ESPN posted a video from a soccer coach at the University of Washington named Amy Griffin, who had a couple of players who unfortunately came down with cancer. And she began to look into soccer players throughout the country and developed a pretty extensive database. To her credit, really took this head on and was convinced, Ms. Griffin was convinced that it was crumb rubber that was causing the issue. And this got a lot of national exposure for quite some time. And rightly, people, when they hear cancer, becomes pretty emotional. I think we've probably all been affected by it, and it's something that you have to take seriously and look at. So to date, we as consultants have to sort of look at this thing and say, okay, what does this really mean? So we've looked at the available scientific data that is out there. There are anywhere between 90 and 100 scientific peer-reviewed published studies that have been performed throughout the world on the potential health risk of using crumb rubber in general, and specifically in synthetic turf. And what we have found is that all of those studies conclude that crumb rubber does not pose a significant health risk, including but not limited to the following bodies, a couple of international bodies, the Dutch National Institute for Public Health and the European Chemical Agency, and some national ones, the Massachusetts Bureau of Environmental Health, Connecticut Department of Health, and notably the Washington State Department of Health, and researchers at the University of Washington School of Public Health, who, when confronted with the information from Ms. Griffin, began to look at these studies and did their own individual study to look at the players in that area that had instances of cancer, and then looked at the general public. And I think what's notable is that the Washington State Department of Health concluded that the number of cancer cases among soccer players was less than expected based on the rates of cancer among Washington residents of the same ages. So I think that is an important conclusion to come to, that I think we need to have kids out playing on these fields, and I don't necessarily think that not using crumb rubber is something that, or using crumb rubber is something that should be immediately just wiped off the table because emotions are high on this subject. So a little more information. There's over 1,200 crumb rubber fields in the United States. Virtually every Massachusetts municipality has installed one, some several, and they have come to the same conclusion as the following academic institutions. And again, academic institutions who study these kind of things as a basis for what they do. Amherst, Boston College, Boston University, Harvard University, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Northeastern University, Tufts University right down the street, and also places like Stonehill, Bridgewater State, and Wheaton College. They have looked at these studies as well and come to the conclusion that they feel their athletes are safe playing on these surfaces. I want to state again that a total of 0 scientific peer-reviewed studies have been published that demonstrate a link or even an elevated risk of cancer playing on these fields. So chemicals of potential concern, or COPCs, with crumb rubber are chemically bound to the particulate and are not bioavailable through dermal contact, ingestion, or inhalation. So they do exist in rubber. There are things in rubber that aren't great, but you can't get them. Your body can't absorb them and take them in. The only way to release them from the particulate is with industrial solvents, which are many more times corrosive than human sweat or even stomach acid. And the same can be said for off-gassing of SPOCs and PAHs. It's just too hard to get those things out of the rubber particles. Many published and peer-reviewed studies, including studies from the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, State of California Office of Environmental Health and Hazard Assessment, and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and Department of Health, have concluded that there is not an elevated risk to all populations playing on crumb rubber fields, and 0 scientific peer-reviewed studies have been published which conclude that there is an elevated risk. So I think it's still important to sort of keep looking at it. So when you hear that there are things in crumb rubber that aren't good for you, I think the same could be said for a lot of the clothing that we're wearing, the shoes that we're wearing, the glasses that we may be wearing. There are things in there that aren't good for you, but that your body cannot absorb. So we hired an environmental consultant, a risk consultant, a toxicologist to essentially look at this for us and look at some of the studies that she had done, where she essentially said, and I want to go actually to the next page, did a sort of a risk study, which is exposure to these things by toxicity and what it meant in terms of bioavailability of these chemicals. And she said, what if I were to actually use those really heavy solvents, much more damaging to the rubber than your stomach is or your sweat would be? Well, what would happen if I did actually pull those out and expose people to them in a risk analysis, in a hypothetical study? And so she did this and extracted metals, PAHs, SPOCs, VOCs, and took them out of the rubber, and then compared them to applicable standards for soil and the ASTM standards, looked at ingestion of the crumb rubber particles, the dermal contact with crumb rubber particles in the turf, and then the inhalation of these chemicals that may potentially volatilize from synthetic turf, and that you could actually inhale and get into your system. And what she found is the things that are bound up in that rubber and wouldn't come out under normal situations, if she was to actually pull them out, she found that the concentrations were actually far below ASTM and the European standard for safety of toys. And then if you compare that to background, Massachusetts background for soils, the data background, you find that the majority of the metals are, again, below what is allowable for Massachusetts, with the exception of zinc. There are a number of studies about zinc. Again, it's pretty much locked up in the soil, but it's not something that's an issue for us. So when she looked at this, her risk assessment, to establish the potential risks if we could be exposed to these, and said, all right, risk is exposure times toxicity, and if we try to take the most conservative assumptions and basically say the maximum exposures, if she were to take subchronic stuff, which are for little kids, 2 days a week, 8 hours a day for 30 weeks out of the year, if they were basically just rolling around and stuff. Same for people who are older throughout their lifetime, if they spent 3 days a week playing for 30 weeks a year on these things, and that they were exposed to all these chemicals through either ingestion or dermal contact, so that they would ingest 100 milligrams per kilogram of crumb rubber each day. They would also have crumb rubber sticking to their face, their forearms, their hands, their lower legs, and their feet. And then said, what if we assume that there was a bunch of dust that was created, and it's called the fugitive dust scenario, and that they were inhaling this dust 8 hours a day? Assuming, again, that it can happen, but it does not happen. She found that the reality is that ages 1 through 31 for a 30-year exposure, the risk was still de minimis. Even if you could get all these things that you really can't get out of it. So she compared playing on a synthetic turf field with everyday activities that we think of, and what is a similar risk to this: eating grilled food like hamburgers and steak, pumping your own gasoline, living in a home that has an oil heating system, or using spray fragrances around your house like Febreze or Lysol that have VOCs and SVOCs. And so, again, we've looked at this a lot. It's an important part of what we do. We don't want to go around specifying things that are going to be bad for people. And based upon the science that we've reviewed, we don't think that there's a risk for people playing on these fields. I play on these fields. I allow my kids to play on these fields, and I think you should also allow your kids to play on these fields based upon the science and not the emotion that's there. I think kids need to get out and play more than they do, and this is going to give you an ability to use Roosevelt Park much more than it's used today.
Thank you.
Just a few questions. I know, having worked for the State Department of Environmental Protection and sat with many toxicologists having to deal with issues of toxic chemicals around schools, people like to look at things with abundance of caution. I do appreciate what Patrick has presented is exactly what our top state toxicologists would look and consider. And I've looked at a lot of the reports, and I think the methodologies are what our top state officials will do. There's still always scientific uncertainty, and people have different ways of interpreting that. So I know, there's always the question of, well, there's still natural grass. We did look at natural grass, and I know, we came up with some calculations that, the cost may be a little bit more, but we need to do that. But one of the things we didn't really get to at the meeting at Salem was we were talking about the limits related to a natural field that would be developed in the floodplain in terms of what restrictions we might need to put on the field in terms of making sure it remains playable a lot, and in terms of how can you will grass thrive when it gets so heavily used in the floodplain. So Patrick, have you worked on grass fields as well?
So started doing this because I was good at doing grass fields. So we've done a number of them. We still work on grass fields. A majority of the grass fields that we do work on are at colleges and universities who can afford to build them correctly and maintain them and keep people off them when they shouldn't be used. We do also do a number of fields in municipal situations. They're typically not the heavy use fields that are in either cities and towns that are either at schools or are part of a recreational inventory. They're typically ancillary fields that are used only periodically, just because as much as I think I said at the last meeting, I'd rather play on natural grass, good natural grass, than synthetic turf, but understanding that natural grass is a living thing that requires a pretty significant regime of maintenance to keep it in good condition. We just can't expect that to happen in a municipal situation where a field is used virtually every day.
So have you seen other municipalities sort of faced with this flooding field situation and make these decisions, and how do they weigh that out?
Yeah, I don't necessarily see this as being the We've worked in some places where the flooding field is actually in velocity zone. Rushing through, and I think that makes it an easy one, and it becomes a field that is not a heavily used field. We have done synthetic field in flooding situations. Dedham, the town that I am from, we did a field right in the Charles River in the floodplain there, and the water sort of creeps up on the field and then it recedes and everything's fine, and the next day you go and you play on it. As soon as the flood waters are gone, you
So the synthetic or a grass field?
Synthetic.
So, but they chose it synthetic in that situation?
Yes, they chose synthetic.
So yeah, that's just kind of the thing. I know, in particular, I know with our public works director, that was the real concern. Our rec department, that these fields are closed relatively frequently because of the rain and the wetness of this field. So
I think you'll find that with a synthetic surface here, they will be closed much less frequently. Certainly due to rain, and I think if you have flood conditions, the closure of that field will be minimized until the water is.
And what about long-term maintenance? Let's say we did go with a grass field here. What are the challenges have been of what we have to do to maintain, and even like the longer-term thing? I know I first met you up in Gloucester, at the stadium there, where they had to resod their grass field like every 3 years because you just couldn't stand up to even some moderate issues in the floodplain. So
I think that's the same scenario that you see. I mean, we can tell what happens to that field under the current situation. It's not in good condition. It gets way overused and isn't maintained significantly enough. I'm going to assume that people try the best that they can with the budgets that they have to do that. In order to have a grass field that is capable of withstanding the kind of abuse that recess every day is going to put on it, any kind of recreational use that happens after school is out, and then I would hope that people are using this on the weekend. I hope people are out recreating during the week as well. If we're going to use a field that often and it's natural grass, the amount of maintenance that it's going to take to keep the natural grass in good condition is probably tenfold what you're doing now. It's going to require somebody who is constantly monitoring that field. Fertilization is going to have to be increased. Aeration treatments are going to have to be increased. You're going to be overseeding, monitoring irrigation, doing all kinds of things to sort of keep that field in play as long as it can be kept in play. If you're playing lacrosse and soccer out there, goal mouse and goal pieces for lacrosse are going to have to be resodded pretty frequently, and I would assume that every couple of years you're going to be doing a complete resodding of that field to keep it all in good shape, just because they get worn out. Grass is a real thing. It's a living thing. It gets tired when it gets tired.
So, I mean, the other choice is just to severely cut back on use.
Yeah, and that's a fair statement, that if you want it to be a grass field that's in good condition, don't use it very often. And don't use it when it rains. Don't use it the day after it rains, or knowing that the soils there are pretty heavy, you might want to wait a couple of days after it rains to use that field, which in the college situations and high school situations that we have where people actively manage those fields and want to keep them in top condition for competitive purposes, they don't use them. That's sort of the rule. If it rains, you go somewhere else. Typically, they go to the synthetic field that they have, because that can handle the use.
Council Anderson and then Council DeMaria.
I'm all set.
Council DeMaria?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for my delay. I was out of the week, so I'll try to move fast, but I've been agonizing over this for weeks. So first off, thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Director Burke. Great work on bringing this and finding a financial way to get this done for our students and our athletes. To me, most importantly, is safety. Safety of our children. So a couple of questions. So when you referred to she did the study, who?
Marie Rudiman.
And who is she?
She's a toxicologist at Enviro Risk. She was at the public meeting.
Oh, she was at Salem then?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I must have missed that. Have we ever reached out to our Board of Health to see if they can chime in and put a, stamp of approval? Chris Webb, have we considered doing something like that? Because I personally look to the experts to give me guidance in a decision like this. Don't know if we...
I'm not sure that that's under his purview, to be honest with you. I have not had a dialogue with him, but I don't think him going out and taking water and tests or soils and whatnot out there, he, within his job description, I could be wrong.
Okay. Okay, and, all right. So help me understand that this presentation is basically for crumb rubber. Help me understand where the possibility of an organic choice is in this plan.
How that came up, the application, actually, the application that went to CPC is silent on the synthetic because CPC funds do not fund synthetic turf. So, what the bonding tonight is for all the other parts of the infrastructure that's going into the rehabilitation of Roosevelt Park in terms of fencing, benches, netting, etc. The enhancement of the wetlands, the outdoor classroom piece. During, the several discussions that have been had in this facility or the night at Salemwood, the applicant and as well as, the board council weighed in. We were asked if we would look at an alternative infill mix in addition to, besides the plum rubber. Out of, the respect for the voices that were heard, we have, indicated that, if we're successful in receiving these funds, that there's a commitment on the table to advertise the project for, the plum rubber infill mix with getting pricing on alternate infill mix as well. One that was mentioned was, Pat can probably speak to the different ones. I know he can, no problem. One was a, coconut mixture that was in some facilities around here. So, but that's how we landed on that. If that answers your question.
And may I just add to that, if you roll back prior to, what we heard from the general public, if you remember sitting in the mayor's conference room with Patrick, it actually, we had actually, the mayor and I had actually talked about what else was out there, and that's when Patrick came in with his canister of all the different infill materials. So that was well before, any discussion happened, really with the public. We as a group, as a team, wanted to look at, alternatives also.
Okay.
So we had, asked Patrick to do that, and we could move forward in that vein.
So that's the next step, is once the funding is approved, through this process and then on to the floor, then it is a...
Well, right now, we did receive $250,000 that has already been approved by this committee and the full city council, which allows us and then frees up students to do design development. So that will be a 6 to 9 month period doing design for the project. And the conclusion of that, the project will be put out to bid for, this type of treatment or an alternative.
And that's been pretty common for how we've been putting out public bids as of late. And to answer the question that you kind of gave me, which is what is it? There are a number of different alternatives to rubber that are available. There are coated rubbers that you basically take the same tire rubber and you put a polyurethane coating around it, which essentially encapsulates the rubber. I would argue that it encapsulates what's already been encapsulated. So to me, it's not a real wise use of money because it doesn't really do anything. It might make people feel better about things, but it doesn't make them feel safe. Most of the other infills that are available, again, I think from a safety perspective, they're not making the field safer. They may make you feel better about it. Some of them might increase performance depending on how you're going to be using the field. If we were doing a synthetic field that was a practice field for a professional soccer team, we would use something different than we would use one of the organic alternatives because they do perform better from ball roll, ball bounce. 6 and 10-year-old kids know the difference. A 25-year-old professional soccer player is going to know. So we are happy to look at the alternatives that are available, happy to get alternative pricing for those and help you understand what the pluses and typically we're going to find that the minus column is that they do cost quite a bit more money. In nearly every case, that's both capital cost up front and maintenance cost. Because they do have a different maintenance requirement. The organic ones that I'm speaking of, they do perform great, but they do compact things really hard, so they require a little bit more maintenance than a conventional field might require. If they dry out, they get brittle and abrasive against your skin, so you've got to keep them moist.
Versus crumbler.
Versus crumbler. So if they're moist, they're great. If they're not moist, if we get a hot summer where it doesn't rain for 2 or 3 weeks, then we've got to apply water to them because it will get dry. I mean, it's coconut, right? If you think about rubbing your coconut.
About cork.
That's a mixture in one of them. There aren't any, I would say, legitimate infills that are 100% cork, and cork tends to float. So knowing that this is in a flood situation, I'm not sure that cork would be one of the things that I'd include in an organic infill. So there are a number of variations on what organic infills are. Most of them have coconut husk as a basis. The bulk of them along with sand, so the sand. And they're backed up by different things. In the past, people used peat. That didn't turn out so good.
Things like,
Like
peat
yeah, peat
moss?
moss, which broke down.
Yeah.
Kind of got buttons nasty, so they stopped using that. They use rice hulls sometimes. Pork is another one of the things, and then there's some that just sort of use the straight. And there's a new infill on the market that is made out of some species of pines, essentially wood. And it's processed a certain way, it does not break down. It looks very promising, but there are 2 or 3 fields in the world that are about 3 months old, and I don't know that I'd recommend to a city that they'd spend $1 million on something that's not proven. I think there's promise there, but I'm not sure that we want to be anything for that particular problem.
well, I thank you for doing that research, and I trust that when it goes to bid, that those options will be on the table. I think that would be the caveat to my vote this evening. In speaking with the recreational director, I know the scheduling was a concern to some residents, who's going to get it at what time, and that certainly, that seems to be right on point with, our Malvern High School athletic department, which would be a priority. So, so that was another concern. But again, I personally apologize for the lack of robocall or whatever at Salemwood School. I just should have wrapped my arms around that a little bit tighter. I know that we did the best we could with that. We've got to do a little bit better with that. And so I thank you for your time. Thank you for answering those questions.
I just didn't want to stifle. Mr. McGuire, could you explain who you are again?
Yeah, sure. I'm a landscape architect, principal at Activitas. We're landscape architects and civil engineers that specialize in athletic facilities.
So are you designing this project?
We'll help Steve design the project and specify the system.
But you don't sell the product.
I don't sell the product.
You talked about maintenance costs. What kind of maintenance costs should we expect from the crumb rubber? I've heard that you get to replenish the crumb.
Yeah, periodically. If you're plowing this, which is one of the great things about the crumb rubber, is that if it snows, you can remove the snow and kids can get out and play, which I think is a good thing. If you're pushing that stuff around, it does get diminished over time. We spend a lot of time during construction, however, making sure that the contractors provide us with an adequate amount of rubber to begin with. And that includes making sure that 2 or 3 months after the field is installed, that they come back when the rubber has had a chance to settle in and we have them have a little bit more rubber. So in terms of the addition of rubber, over time we hope it's pretty minimal because we've got the right to start with. Some of it invariably is going to come back a little bit. It's going to get plowed out of the way when it goes home and shoes and things like that. So
So what would that cost?
The maintenance cost in that, it would be down, but it's, a bag of rubber is a couple of $1,000. And if you are, I wouldn't think you'd need for 100,000 square feet more than 10, so it might be $10,000 or $20,000 over the life of the field for that, if you needed that all.
And then what is the lifetime of the warranty?
The warranty is 8 years. We have seen in municipal situations that they're lasting at least that. Most of them are going 10 and 12. And full disclosure, years 10 and 12, those fields are in tough shape. But they're still safe and playable. They don't look very good. But I would expect that you'd get a minimum of 8 and then more likely 10 to 12 out of it. And Pine Banks Park went 13 years before.
And then, I noticed in your presentation here, you had mentioned about that, the crumb rubber could be prone to leaching. Can you talk about?
That's actually earlier versions of tire rubber that was used to do these things. So the rubber that is now used is conventionally passenger tire rubber. It's processed in a different way and then triple washed so that what comes out onto the field is not something that is susceptible to leaching. We've had to, in the past, I want to say 10 or 12 years ago, did a field in Concord that was in a floodplain right on Concord River. And the Conservation Commission in Concord, doing their job, said we're concerned about the river. We want to know what's going to be flushing into this. So they made us do a multi-year study where we took samples of what was coming out of that field. So we took the drainage system, sent it to a certain place. We took samples of those things, and what we actually found was that the water coming out of the field was cleaner than the rainwater that was falling on the field because it was being filtered through the stone drainage systems. So in terms of leaching, I'm fairly concerned.
So cleaner from like a bacterial point of view. What about, is there any additional chemicals?
No, it's actually cleaner. The stone and things was what stone soils filter water that goes through. We found that the field drainage system actually did a pretty good job of filtering rainwater.
And you mentioned the Conservation Commission. Have you gotten approval or resubmitted this to the Conservation Commission?
That would happen, once we get into design development, if we advance the design far enough along, that it's sufficient to represent detail, then we would file with the Conservation Commission.
So notice of intent.
Notice of intent.
Why wouldn't that be done before?
You have to know what your design is, so what you proposed in more detail than a concept.
Construction documents.
Not final construction documents, but maybe like 75% quantity.
Okay, thank you.
On committee, Councilor Anderson.
Yes, you mentioned in response to Councilor O'Malley's question, the life expectancy of what you're proposing. You mentioned 8 years, you can pretty much be comfortable with that, may go as much as 10 and 12. So what's the field like after 10 or 12 years? It has, at that point, has reached its life expectancy. Does that mean that it's full of holes? Does that mean that it can't be used? What does that mean?
It means that it's super unattractive.
Super unattractive.
The carpet gets beat up pretty good at that point in time. So the rubber
Like an old rug in the house.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's like. It just, you sort of look at it and say it's tired, it's time to replace this. And we've done a number of field replacements in the last couple of years from the original generation of these that we did 8, 10, 12, 15 years ago.
And in today's, let me just cut you short. In today's cost, what would the replacement of that be? Assuming that we go forward with this,
Yeah,
10 years later, the rug doesn't look as pretty as it did when it first went down. What would the cost be in today's dollars?
So in today's dollars, probably 5,000 square feet, figure $5. So 500,000, 525,000.
$500,000.
Yeah, $500,000. And so, as I said, we've done a number of these things, and many of the systems that we did a number of years ago were on pads to begin with. The pads still last been recycling and reusing the infill as well. So we have the contractors suck out the sand and rubber infill. They get rid of the carpet, they bring in new carpet, they clean the infill, put what is left, and then augment it. So we will clean out a little bit of top stuff that has hair in it, and top things and all kinds of stuff. But the stuff that's down the bottom is in pretty good condition.
So the cost to put in the stuff that's down the bottom, the sand and so, what is that?
That'll save you probably 30 or 40.
So how much money are we talking about, the initial cost?
It was six square bucks. Just the field, yeah. Thanks, Steve.
650 versus
Five. Because the pad.
square foot, yes, okay.
Yeah, but to clarify, that's not including the base.
Yeah, you don't,
So here, there's stone, and then sand, and then,
So that's what I was asking. I was asking what the original installation cost is. Yes.
But this project, including all the ancillary improvements, it's a 2.6 ratio.
No, I guess I'm just asking, then let me just refine it. I'm asking what the actual cost of the installation of the turf and the underlying materials would be. You told me it's about $5 a square foot in the replacement. So if it's 5 in the replacement, what is it in the initial installation? 610. Okay. 610,000 versus after. Okay.
Yeah, and that's, again, because part of that 610 in the initial purchase of this is that padding system, which adds resilience so if kids fall. And when we talk about science and what it means in terms of infill, there's also a lot of science and a lot of data there that says kids' heads are important and that you don't want them, they're going to bang their heads, we want to protect them as best we can, and a pad is going to do that. There's a lot of research that says that makes a lot of sense, so that's money that I think is well spent because you purchase it once and it lasts through 3 or 4 days.
And so by comparison, you mentioned if there were grass that were down, that would require, in order to keep it as nice as the turf would be, what's the cost comparison with that? I know you mentioned that if it did get damaged, it would need to be dried out for a few days, and you couldn't get back to it to do repairs. But how about the dollar cost? Have you compare that?
We've done a number of analyses on not this specific field, but in generalities, and then dialed in for specific fields to see what they cost. Because in this situation, remember, the natural grass field costs more than a conventional natural grass field because we've got some environmental things that we might not necessarily have to deal with. And in general round numbers, you might spend, say, 30 cents a square foot taking care of rubber, and that would be grooming it, and if you needed to apply new stuff, if you're painting fields on there, it's about 30 cents a square foot per year, compared to a natural grass field that's fairly well maintained is about twice that. And one that you would maintain really well and expect to use all the time, would speculate might be as much as 3 times that. If you're going to say, okay, we're going to have this fieldy grass, annually. Yeah, we're going to have this be natural grass because it's really important. And we're going to have natural grass that can be used almost all, other than in a downpour. That means a lot of resodding. That means a lot of person hours to mow it more often so that it's denser. There's a lot of overseeding. There's a lot of other cultural maintenance that has to take place so that you can expect to have thriving.
And what is the maintenance to this, to the turf? You know, we know that if it's grass, you've got to mow it, you've got to feed it, you've got to water it.
We don't have to feed it. We don't have to feed it.
Don't have to feed it.
Not yet.
Don't have to mow it.
No, don't have to mow it. We do have to groom it, which is sort of similar to mowing, although it's not required nearly as frequently. I would speculate that every couple of weeks you'd have enough use on this field that you would have somebody out there that has either a golf cart or a gator machine that has a drag behind broom and it just sort of stands the fibers up a little bit, redistributes the infill, and sort of.
Is that what we do at McDonald's Stadium?
So we already have that.
So we already have the equipment?
Yeah, we already have the equipment to do that, which is good. That's feels a little bit cheaper, certainly. And then once, or at least once, preferably twice a year, we feel it's a good idea to have whoever is the manufacturer, that's the low bid selected contractor for this, come in and perform their own maintenance, which would be a little bit more aggressive. They get down deeper into the infill to loosen it up and decompact it, take out any kind of bobby pins that have fallen into it, or any kind of metal that has worked its way off clean, or if somebody drops a ring or a necklace to clean that kind of stuff out. So a couple of times a year, we recommend that you have somebody come in and do that. That does two things. One is it makes the manufacturer put their eyes on the field. Yeah.
All the turf fields now get done twice a year with the outside contractor. Plus, we run our machine once a month on all the turf fields. So they're getting the maintenance and everything that they need. We also do the GMAX testing on the field. So.
I'm all set, thank you.
Questions from Council Nelson, but also from Council.
I just have a quick question. The maintenance process with a foam rubber, is it the same with the organic?
No, the organic requires a little bit more. You have to, yeah.
With
It's
the
just
same machinery, I mean,
generally the same,
Okay.
slightly different, a little bit more aggressive. There's some metal tines that you use instead of just bristles.
and that would be attached to
That would be
as a drag you had mentioned. But it's the same process.
It's
In
the
other words,
same.
we don't need to go out and buy another machine if we,
No, it's an attachment that maybe
Okay.
is $4,000 or $5,000.
Right.
And the cost of the whole project is
Council Nelson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. McGuire, for the presentation. My question is, aside from the cancer, I'm curious about the propensity to cause physical injury versus natural turf. So the injuries that people are most concerned about these days, are concussions, but sprained ligaments, knees, bones. Are there long-term studies that you can cite that say this is as safe or safer than the natural turf?
Yeah, there are some studies that are out there. Most of them have to do with big physical athletes that weigh several hundred pounds apiece. A lot of them are at the college and the NFL level.
Well, it's all relative.
Yeah, it's all relative.
Right, so if you weigh lighter, I mean.
Yeah, and so the injuries that have been found to be a little bit more, there's a greater propensity to get toe injuries, which is called turf, basically turf toe.
Turf toe.
And turf toe is not stubbing your toe. For the longest time in my life, I thought it was just stubbing your toe. It's not. It's that when a heavy athlete is running and their cleat is about to release, it doesn't, literally milliseconds, it doesn't release, right? And that joint sort of pops. And
It's like a tendonitis condition?
yeah, it creates a tendonitis condition. It's not something that I would expect kids to have happen to them.
What about the impact to someone's head?
Obviously, if you're playing contact sports, you can expect to do that, which is why we include the pad in there. And I think a well-maintained synthetic field is going to be better for kids than certainly the field that's out there now. And there is testing that we do on these fields to make sure they fall within certain standards. The common one that has been used has always been GMAX, which is just a measure of sort of resilience. It's a test that comes from the automotive industry, sort of impact on dashboard, which is an okay guide, but it's not necessarily the best way to look at this. So we've begun to introduce testing required for something called HIC, which is head injury criteria, and we try to make sure that the system is designed so that the threshold is basically 1,000, so that if somebody were to fall from 6 feet high and hit their head on the ground, that it's well below 1,000 on the HIC test, and that is sort of a gauge on the likelihood that somebody will incur a head injury if they do fall. So we're designing these systems to have as much resilience as we possibly can.
But as it measures up with natural grass, would you say it's...
And the HIC criteria actually comes from them measuring really good natural grass fields and saying, here's how they test out. We have a really good natural grass field. The HIC criteria is falling.
Compares it against that.
Yeah.
That's the baseline.
Correct.
Okay.
So we're designing these systems to try to as closely match that baseline as we can. And obviously, a 12-inch profile of sand is going to react differently than a pad and a system. And to try to get those two systems to absolutely align for head injury criteria, we might throw other things off. We might have to do things to that system that make it too soft so that you might get more knee injuries and you might get more ankle injuries. So we try to, there's been a protocol developed by the international rugby folks, and the NFL is coming on board, and FIFA, which is the international body for soccer, they've looked at natural grass fields, really well-maintained natural grass fields, and said, here's the sweet spot that we're trying to get for synthetic turf fields so that they perform well and they're as safe as you can expect. And obviously, people playing contact sports are going to get hurt. We're trying to minimize the amount of injuries that happen as a result of it.
So the fastest growing sport is soccer. And I guess my question is this the preferred method for soccer fields? Is this something that you're seeing is more common in soccer fields? Because I've noticed on natural turf, I think you mentioned this, in front of the goal post, it gets worn out really early in the season. What you have is a patch of dirt.
Yeah, if I could solve that problem, I would not be sitting here. I'd be on my own island somewhere relaxed. But that's the downfall of natural grass. Again, is it is a living thing. It can only withstand so much abuse. So these are actually in a goal mouth going to probably be in better condition than most natural grass fields are going to be in a public field.
But do you find the municipalities are preferring this synthetic field for soccer use versus natural grass? Is that something you know of?
Municipalities, yes. We do a lot of work for the Revolution as well. And the answer of professional teams is no. They're not looking for that. They're looking for natural grass stuff. But at high school and municipal levels, it seems to be, I wouldn't say the preferred surface, but it's certainly a very acceptable surface because it allows the kids to get out and train deeper into the winter and earlier in the spring. And when they do get out on these fields, it's predictable. They know that they're going to be in decent shape, whereas they could go to a grass field that hasn't been mown in it or has never been mown, or is they're playing at some field down the road that doesn't get the maintenance and care. So
What about the end user? Do you have any data on end user preference? In other words, do the young people that use these fields, they prefer them versus natural grass, or they prefer natural grass?
It's
I'm
changed.
sorry, can you speak just a little bit louder so somebody?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The answer is that professional soccer players do not prefer them.
Right. They had, and you said that they limited the use of professional fields, and that was one of the major.
Yeah, they do exist. Obviously, the Revolution play on a synthetic surface at Gillette Stadium out of necessity. There are some other teams that do. They don't prefer it. As you start to get into the college ranks, soccer again will not prefer it, but you find that many college football players, certainly college lacrosse players, and college field hockey players would prefer to play on synthetic turf than most grass fields. I think if you gave them an intimate, amazing grass field, they might say, I'd like to play on that, but that's just not reality. You expect that you're going to be able to deliver it to them Fenway Park every day.
Thank you.
Kids think it's the coolest thing in the world, right?
I imagine the opinions vary.
Yeah, opinions vary, yeah.
You're seeing this a lot with high schools. You're seeing this more and more.
Oh, yeah, there's, I don't even know how many there are, there's thousands of these in Massachusetts. Nearly every town that I'm aware of has them. Most high schools have them. Virtually every private school has at least one and maybe two.
It probably has a lot to do with the amount of use that you're looking to put on the field. So you probably see it more in a city that has a dense population versus a community that's more rural.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councilor Murphy? So we have a motion on the table to accept the.
Do we have to amend it or
There's a bond, there's two cases.
Okay,
The
so,
first thing we need to do is we need to accept.
Okay.
The CPC needs to know that they've accepted their recommendation.
So,
And then we can vote on the board.
okay, I'll second that.
so related to that, I just want to read that, just so we're clear. This is the Malton CPC bond funding recommendation for the FY 2019 Roosevelt Park project. Under authority of Chapter 44B, the law Community Preservation Board is recommending a bond 10-year term for $1,450,000 for 4.25% interest fund. Interest to fund CPA aspects of the park rehabilitation project fiscal year 2019 by the Malton Development Authority. This bond recommendation is in addition to the $250,000 Malton CPC funding recommendation that was previously submitted and accepted by Malton Mayor Gary Christensen and the Malton City Council. The Malton CPC has voted that the Roosevelt Park project must include the outdoor classroom stated in the fiscal FY 2019 CPA funding application. The Malton CPC has voted that the Roosevelt Park project must include the drainage improvements as outlined and the proposal must be made to surrounding wetlands. Although Malton CPC is not available from this term option, the Malton CPC has respectfully requested that the applicant consider several alternative synthetic products as new technology has entered the synthetic turf market. The applicant has agreed to consider an alternative grading process. So that's specifically the CPC recommendation. Second.
I second it.
Here's the bond report. Chairman of the bond.
10-year term.
10-year term.
So the only reason I asked that is because it seems as though from what I heard tonight, we're going to have to replace this field either just before or at the time that we and at $100 or $525,000, and we divide that by 10, if we put in $52,000 in maintenance to this field annually, we might be able to maintain a really nice grass field if we actually, if we know that we can replace it. Just something to think about. The replacement cost of $525,000 every 10 years, maybe every 8 years. Put that money up front into maintenance. I mean, it's easy to have let a field fall apart over the last 19 years and then say, we need to replace this. It's a failure. But we didn't maintain it. So I'm only concerned that we do the same thing to other fields in the city and then say, we need to have some better record. I think it's important that we get to a point where we're maintaining our fields and putting the money in, even if it's going to cost $50,000 a year, because we're going to need to replace it now.
Yeah, I'm off committee, and I don't want to belabor the discussion, but I think Councilor O'Malley has a good point. When you compare the capital upfront cost and the maintenance cost of the turf versus grass, where are those numbers coming out? I just want to make sure.
Actually, very, very similar, particularly in this situation where your natural grass field actually costs quite a bit more money. And in the cost, there's some environmental things that have to be mitigated in a natural grass situation that don't have to be mitigated in a synthetic situation. Is that correct?
It's been mitigated to a greater degree in natural gas situation.
So there's some higher costs.
So a larger upfront cost, but
Larger upfront costs, and also maintenance costs are pretty significantly higher. So if you look at it over, if you just a 10-year period, you were to look at this field, the costs are actually pretty similar. Where I think the benefit to the city is not necessarily in just looking at the overall cost number. It's looking at the cost per use number and how much more you're going to be able to use a synthetic field, even again well-maintained.
so hours of operation is one of the major factors.
Significantly greater use. And when we do the cost analyses for these, we actually shade things in favor of natural grass. We say that it's going to do things that we really can't expect it to do, which is to be in really good condition all the time. We assume that you're not going to have to totally resod it when
the fact is you may have to resod 2 or 3 times, and that all of a sudden your 55 to 60 cents a square foot becomes $1 a square foot over time. So your capital costs and maintenance costs over that 10-year period are virtually identical, but it might be cost per use for a synthetic field that you're using thousands of times is $100, and for the grass field that you're only using 400 times is a couple $100, $300. And then if you then take that scenario out even further and say 24 years, right? I assume that the city of Malden's going to be a going concern 24 years from now, and you say, okay, if we do 2 or 3 carpet replacements over that period, and then look at it and say, a natural grass field, well-built, well-maintained, when you hit 24 or 25 years, it's time to redo that in its entirety. So when you look at the 24 years out, the numbers really look even better in favor of doing a synthetic surface.
I did forget to ask you about skin abrasions. I've seen these in stores and seen images of the crumb rubber sticking into the skin and causing skin abrasions. Is that a significant risk, and is it more of a risk than natural grass? I want to compare things to natural grass.
Natural grass, if it is watered before the kids play on it every time, like you might do on a professional surface, is less abrasive. It's more sort of slippery, but if it's not watered and it's dry, you get cuts and scrapes the same. As I was a college goalkeeper. I still play despite the fact that I'm too old. My wife tells me to stop. And I get the same kind of abrasions on fake grass as I do on real grass.
Okay.
The kids, you're going to get scrapes, and that's the nature of playing sports.
Yeah, no, I did, that was one thing that, Patrick mentions is really looking at the cost per use. And I know even looking at some of the studies that, we received today about at Springfield, which is maintaining a grass field, they can use about $1,000 a year, which works out to about 5 hours a day. I mean, here at Roosevelt, you could be using it from 7 a.m. to 11 o'clock at night, which is 16 hours a day. You could use it, almost 3 times as much without, in just the basic maintenance, and that's probably even more when you would factor in days where you might have rain and that type of thing. But I think at a minimum, you could look at that as potential. And we know the kids are going to be showing up at Salem Wood at 7:30 in the morning using it. There's lights out there. It can be used that much without that much work. You certainly cannot use a grass field that much. And right now we're spending just over $100,000 a year maintaining all our parks. And so, I do agree that that's very small considering we spend $428,000 just maintaining Pine Banks Park. So we do have to work to increase these numbers. And I do hope in the long run we don't use these numbers to always reach for synthetic turf. But I think because this is our most crowded elementary school, has lights, I think we as a council, and I appreciate MRA making the due diligence happen. We've had our meeting. I think we've heard the questions. We've had very thoughtful responses. I am willing to proceed and recommend we go with the recommendation of CPC here. I think this is a very worthy project for our most busy elementary school in a busy field, and it'll be a great asset to the city. So, and I think we've done our due diligence. And I personally am also willing as a counselor related to the infill. It's going to cost money. I do have, and I think we all do have our mitigation money. We'd be willing to chip in some money to make up that difference, just to do that. Not that I'm worried about the science, but if we want to be, a little bit extra and over the top on our protectiveness, I'm willing to spend that bit of extra money if necessary. So I think that, I'm willing to offer that when you move the question here.
All right. Could you roll call, please? This is, again, just a reminder, this is specifically for acceptance of CPC.
Council Reason.
Yes.
Council Henry.
Yes.
Council Murphy. Yes. Council O'Malley.
Present.
Council Winslow?
Yes.
Council Canal?
Yes. So that passes. Yes,
So then, we make a motion to amend the order that we received. Treasurer and members of the committee to be consistent with the amended language that the treasurer provided.
So does everybody have a copy of that?
Yes.
Don't have to read it. Yes. All right, so a motion to amend per the recent copy from the treasurer. Do I have a second?
Councilor Anderson?
Yes.
Councilor DeMaria? Council Murphy?
Yes.
Council O'Malley?
Yes.
Council Winslow?
Yes.
Council Canal?
Yes. So the amendment passes unanimously. To clean up the language.
Now, motion to approve the following recommendation.
Second.
So motion to, the final motion to approve the actual,
I guess it would be a motion to
Sorry.
recommend.
Recommend.
sorry,
Recommend.
motion to recommend, report out favorably the bonding. Roll call, please.
That's the second, that's
Yeah, I said.
Council Rice.
Sorry,
Second.
moved by Councilor Murphy, seconded by Councilor Woodward.
Councilor Anderson?
Yes.
Councilor DeMaria?
Yes.
Councilor Murphy?
Yes.
Council O'Malley? Councilor Winslow?
Yes.
Yes. So that passes. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next agenda item. I have, we can just have a formal vote here. We'll still have quorum. So before you guys, before you make a motion, motion to table DPW, not, motion, can I hear a motion to table DPW and the police? Motion to table. No, I think we have time for Chief Fed. So motion.
Are we going to have a meeting?
Yes.
So right. Okay, so we take one, so motion to table.
No, we still have it.
Made a motion to table, second by